Good
behalf
evening,
of
everyone.
EOGS, we are welcome you all for the first Zoom meeting of EOGS 2021. Welcome you all. I especially welcome Dr. Shrikala Prasad ma'am, who is the guest lecturer of this day, who is going to share her knowledge of stress and urge incontinence. We welcome you, ma'am. As a team of EOGS, we are organizing this first Zoom meeting today.
Wonderful.
Yeah, this is our meeting for this month. Dr. Shrikala Prasad ma'am and Dr. Praveen Sundar. So I request Dr. Purnima to give a brief introduction about Dr. Shrikala Prasad ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, dear doctors. We welcome you all for our first EOGS 2021 and 2022 academic session. And I wholeheartedly welcome Professor Dr. Shrikala Prasad ma'am for our first EOGS academic session. Ma'am has completed MDDGO and also MCH Urology. She is heading the unit, Professor and HOD of Urology in Chengalpet Medical College. She is past Secretary of OG Society of South India, Secretary of TN Chapter of Society of Vaginal Surgeons of India. Ma'am is 30 years experienced in OBG and 21 years experienced in urology, urogynecology. She has special interest in teaching undergraduate and postgraduate students. Madam is specialized in incontinence surgeries, including urinary fistula, internal iliac artery ligation, in PPH, and also in female urological and urogynecological surgeries, including prostodentia. Great, ma'am. And she's been awarded for the best video, low-cost indigenous sling in stress urinary incontinence in Tamil Nadu on Pondicherry Association of Urologists Conference held in 2009. Madam has organized a 3-day international endorsed urodynamic workshop and live operative conference in June 2019 at ISO KGH, organized live operative workshop for AICOG 2015. Madam has been awarded for the best paper, Management of Stone Disease in Pregnant Patients in OG Society of South India. Madam has been nominated as Indian National Member to the Asia and Oceania Federation of OBG Urogynecological Committee 2020. Ma'am, it's been such an honor for you to have for our first conference, and also with such great topic, ma'am. Today our topic is about unwind the stress about stress and urge incontinence. This is a topic we always wonder about whether our management is right. Is this right? Are we giving the right management to the particular patient? And also, to clear the clouds, we also have interesting case discussion and case scenarios by our urologist, Dr. Praveen Sundar. We welcome you, sir. And Dr. Praveen Sundar is MS, MCH, DNB Urology, FMAS, FALS, and MNAM. He is a consultant urologist and transplant surgeon practicing at KG Nursing Home, Erode. He is a transplant surgeon with special interest in laparoscopy. He is a topper in MS and gold medalist in MCH. He is a faculty in Urological Society of India. He has presented papers and posters in state, zonal, and national urology conferences. We welcome you, sir. Thank you, Professor Dr. Shrikala Prasad ma'am and Dr. Praveen Sundar sir. We welcome you, and I welcome all the EOGS members for this first academic meeting. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ma. Thank you for the nice words of introduction. It is a real honor. It's a real honor to be with you. Such a vibrant society. You seem to be enjoying every aspect of what you're doing. I'm very happy to be with you. So I think we will move on without wasting much time. We'll move on to our talk.
Mute பண்ணிருங்க மத்த எல்லாம் இது except ma'am மத்த எல்லாம் mute பண்ணிருங்க.
Purnima, are you able to see my slides?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It's coming.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
fine. So today's topic would be on urinary incontinence, more in particular about stress and urgency. So incontinence is defined as any involuntary leakage of urine. There is a definite increase in the incidence of incontinence as people age, and at least 1/3 of elderly patients suffer. So as we practice menopause and geriatric practice, we see a more number of people with incontinence. But what you need to know is it is not incurable and it can be evaluated and managed appropriately. This is one of my favorite slides that it shows as a. Am I
Yes, ma'am.
audible? Yeah.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
what I was
Yeah,
talking
ma'am.
is we are worried about the number of people who are suffering with urgency, incontinence, and who don't get help. At the same time, they rush to the toilet, they suffer falls and fractures. Then they become really bedridden, and that is when I was talking of it's becoming a distressing condition. Okay. So as we told, there are 1 minute. Okay, so we know that there are many different types of incontinence. Stress incontinence is when there is involuntary leakage of urine in association with conditions of raised intra-abdominal pressure. For example, when you cough, laugh, sneeze, or you lift heavy weights, or even in changes in posture. Urgency urinary incontinence is a condition in which there is leakage of urine when there is urgency. You say there is urgency when there is an urgent desire to void that cannot be deferred. For most of the people, the moment they think of passing urine, they have to pass. Or when they hear some sound like the tap water flowing, they need to pass. And you have a mixed incontinence where people have both. Or overflow incontinence we see in patients like, for example, Prosidentia who have retention and they come with overflow incontinence. We have other types like functional, transient, fistulas, etc. So what is more important is we need to have a comprehensive medical history. This we have been taught right from our MBBS days, but it is very, very, very important in this incontinence issue. A pertinent physical examination, urine analysis, and other investigations. So here again, I was telling you history is very important. For example, a duration of leak. Supposing a patient says she has undergone a say laparoscopic surgery or a hysterectomy and she has leak in another 10 days, then fistula comes into your mind. The patient says she has had a difficult surgery and the baby also died and leak after 10 or 15 days, you think of a vesicovaginal fistula. Same thing, patient says, I'm able to pass urine normally. In addition to that, I leak 24/7. You think of ureterovaginal fistula. So history gives you a very clear idea as to what the patient is suffering. Similarly, you can from history find out if it is stress, urgency, or mixed, and accordingly you can treat them. The next thing is, what is the amount of leak? Is the amount of leak trivial or significant? If it is very small, I think we really don't need to do anything serious about it. Just teach them weight reduction, pelvic floor muscle training, they would be all right. But in our country, when we want to cut costs, when we don't want to do a urodynamic evaluation for everybody, but at the same time, we want to know whether this incontinence would become all right with the regular transobturator sling. This was a very good history. For example, a patient says she has trivial stress in mark and a marked leak. That means a patient normally coughs, laughs violently and leak. That is normal. But if they just clear the throat, they do this and she leaks. Then she leaks markedly. You have to think of an intrinsic sphincter deficiency, and a simple transobturator sling may not be enough for them. They may have to have a pubovaginal sling or a retropubic sling. Similarly, there are patients who come and say, even if there is a bus, you have a vehicular jerk, then also I leak. then also you think of an intrinsic sphincter deficiency. Then we are very, very extremely competent in taking a very good obstetric gynec history. I mean, we know that well. Here, any abnormal bleeding, postmenopausal bleeding must show some red flags to us, because it could be a cancer cervix presenting with the fistula, could be any malignancy which we should take care. Constipation is a very important aspect of any voiding dysfunction, because it can be a manifestation of a neurogenic bladder. It can cause an obstruction and difficulty in emptying the bladder. It can promote involuntary contractions causing urgency. So if you treat this constipation, they become all right. Again, medication list and bladder diary, I will come into it. So what we are bothered, especially in the geriatric population, is they have multiple comorbidities, diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease, etc., requiring them to take multiple medications simultaneously. So these medications themselves may be a cause of urinary symptoms, or they may exacerbate a pre-existing bladder disorder. So it's very, very imperative that we carefully review the medications which they are taking and then decide. There is a whole lot of list of pharmaceuticals which can interfere with the bladder function, like long-active sedatives, hypnotics, loop diuretics, drugs which have anticholinergic agent properties, alpha-adrenergic blockers, example that one present in the cough medicine, etc. Anti-Parkinson agents, they have a lot of anticholinergic effects. So all these we need to look into. And then we should look what the voiding pattern is, what is the frequency during the day, night, and is there any obstructive symptom? For example, the patient says they have difficulty in passing urine, or need to strain, sense of incomplete emptying, then these patients you need to evaluate for the cause of obstruction. And if it is an irritative symptom, again, like frequency, urgency, nocturia, we cannot ignore it. We have to evaluate what this causes and whether the stream fluctuates during the void. And for example, like prosidentia, you will see patients telling that they may have to push the prolapse mass inside to empty. Till that time, they may have difficulty in passing urine. Any hematuria, again, hematuria is a red flag. So you have to really evaluate the cause of it. Has there been any lower urinary tract instrumentation, or is there any accompanying neurological symptoms? The one point which I want to reinforce is anybody with a neurologic bladder, they are not candidates for any sling surgery. They have to be really evaluated. So if the patient has any accompanying neurologic symptoms, numbness or tingling in the extremities, blurring of vision, double vision, balance or coordination changes, they again belong to the high-risk group who needs to be evaluated well and not taken up straight for a transobturator sling. Again, this we know hormonal status. We look into whether they are premenopausal, postmenopausal, whether they are using estrogen. What is a surgical history? Because a previous pelvic surgery can affect lower urinary tract in function. What is very important is a patient, if she has already undergone an anti-incontinence surgery and has come to you for recurrence, this patient is a high-risk patient who needs to be evaluated well. It could be a neurogenic bladder. It could be an intrinsic sphincter deficiency. So this patient needs to be evaluated properly and taken up for procedure. And again, AP resection of the rectum can also result in a neurologic injury. And a detailed history, which I was talking, including the neurological conditions, radiation or neurologic. One important factor which I would like to emphasize is diabetes mellitus. We have an extremely large number of diabetic patients. A long-standing diabetes, if they have prosidentia and they come to us with a significant increased post-void residue, we may think that with the correction of this prosidentia, their significant post-void residue is going to become all right and their urinary function is going to be all right. The only thing is they may be having some neurogenic bladder or an autonomic cystopathy. So in a patient with diabetes, if they have a significant post-void residue, you should not ignore it and find out whether it was a mechanical cause, the prosidentia was causing the retention, or is there any neurological cause. Again, when we evaluate the mobility, mental status, the drugs, especially in elders, the impact of incontinence on the patient and the caregiver, and accessibility of toilets and lighting, especially in elderly people who have urgency and urgent incontinence. If you improve on all these logistics, they would fare better. In clinical examination, apart from we know masses, tenderness, a distended bladder. A distended bladder in a patient with incontinence, it is going to show us that it is a case of a overflow incontinence. So we have to find out whether this overflow incontinence is because of an obstruction or is it because of a neurogenic cause. And examination, you will look for an atrophy, vulval excoriation, all these findings which we do, look for sister seal, rectus seal, pelvic mass, everything, you are all experts. The only point which I wanted to highlight is here, normally we examine the patient in a full empty bladder. In any gynec examination, we examine the patient in an empty bladder. Here, when we have to examine, we check in a comfortably full bladder where we look for stress leak, and you can see whether the urethra there is hypermobility. And again, this is another valid point. Supposing the patient has emptied the bladder and you have examined, and even in this near empty bladder, she is leaking. This is a manifestation of an intrinsic sphincter deficiency. Again, a simple transobturator sling may not be enough. You need to do robust surgeries for that. A patient complains of stress incontinence, but when you examine, you don't find leak. Whether have you examined in an empty bladder is what you should see. Again, you can re-examine the patient in a standing position as well as with one leg above also. And to complete the examination, we look for a bulbocavernous reflex by either stimulating the clitoris or the medial aspect of the thigh, or if there is a catheter, a gentle tug at the catheter. If you're able to see a brisk contraction of the sphincter, external anal sphincter, we know that the neurogenic arc is intact. In women, up to 30% of people can have a negative VCR but still be neurologically normal. So this is one factor we need to see. At the same time, when our finger is there, you also look for any stool impaction. I told you this constipation can really exacerbate any voiding dysfunction. We can possibly some neurogenic element also. So we have to look into all those things. So when we put a bladder diary, we tell the patient to write meticulously, at least for a period of 48 hours, how much of fluids they are taking and how much of urine they are emptying, the time and the amount, and in between, what was the precipitating factor when the leak occurred? Was there some coughing, laughing, sneezing, or was there some urgency? This bladder diary will also help us. These patients may tell, I'm passing urine more, I have urgency, etc. But they may be drinking 5 to 6 liters of urine, of water, because many of them think any urological complaint, drinking lot of water is a solution. So we can look into the bladder diary and correct them regarding the intake. So the bladder diary will help us in a lot of way. So when you examine the patient, we talk of a bothersome score. So you determine the impact that the leakage has on the patient's daily life and activities. I was talking about a trivial leak. Supposing this trivial leak occurs once in a way, then you really need not go ahead with some surgical management. All what you need is to teach them weight reduction and a pelvic floor muscle training. And you should know whether the incontinence limits the individual's activities. We know people who have been extremely active after the development of this marked SUI, they restrict themselves into their household activities itself. And you should know whether they have made lifestyle changes because of the threat of urinary leakage. And people with overactive bladder, you've seen them do the toilet mapping. Whenever they go, they prefer to go to malls which have toilets, or wherever they go, they know where the toilet will be. So that will show that they are really suffering from this overactive bladder. So the basic investigations are known to all of you. The only important point I want to tell is when you do an ultrasound abdomen, also please evaluate whether there is a significant post-void residue. This significant post-void residue, we say 150 ml or less than 1/3 the pre-void volume. So having an idea as to how much she is stagnating will tell us whether there is some difficulty in emptying or she has got some neurogenic problem. Do you need to do a cystoscopy for everybody with incontinence? This is the question many people ask us. It is really not required for the routine patients of an incontinence. I told you last time that red flag is a hematuria. A patient having hematuria, we always think it is due to a malignancy until proved otherwise. So visible hematuria, microscopic, or whenever there is any suspected pelvic mass or a recurrent UTI with hematuria, then we do cystoscopy. Otherwise, simple and straightforward stress urinary incontinence, we don't do a cystoscopy. The next thing is whether urodynamics is really indicated. It is actually not recommended before starting conservative treatment. Patient has incontinence. I'm only going to teach her pelvic floor muscle training and weight reduction. Then no need to do a urodynamics. Or clearly she says, I cough, laugh, sneeze, and I leak. That also you really don't need to. So when will you do? The most important thing is when there are history of previous surgeries for SUI. That is the most important thing. Even if you think it's an urgency, we can try medical management. But a patient who has had a previous surgeries and failed, you have to know whether this is a neurogenic bladder or there is a hypotonic bladder, or what exactly went wrong. Is there an intrinsic sphincter deficiency? Is there an obstruction? An unclear clinical diagnosis, or patient with mismatch between signs and symptoms, or a suspected neurogenic bladder. So if you are in doubt, it's better to do. If you're very clear that is a simple and straightforward SUI, you can avoid a urodynamics. And so what are the lifestyle modifications you will teach the patients? I told you regarding fluid management, taking an optimum intake of say around 2 liters would be enough. If they take less fluids, also it is bad. Taking more fluids also is bad. So inadequate fluid intake will lead to dehydration, UTI, constipation, decrease the functional capacity of the bladder. And you see many patients with nocturia or OAB, they adjust the timing of the fluids. And dietary irritants like caffeine, other irritants are sugar substitutes, citrus fruits, highly spiced foods, and tomato products. We even ask them to put a food and beverage intake diary. For example, there are many people who come and say green chilies worsen them. This food, what worsens you, don't take. So that is why we encourage them to put a food and beverage intake diary. This constipation is a very important point. I told you, it will act, such a big mass, fecal mass, space occupying lesion, which can obstruct normal voiding. It can cause incomplete bladder emptying and overflow incontinence, and can also promote involuntary detrusor contractions. And self-care practices that promote bowel irregularity are an integral part. For example, here, what especially the elderly people, they have a lot of problem with the passing motion. So we have to ensure that they take both dietary fiber and fluids to ensure normal stool consistency. Just drinking a lot of water will only land in leading to passing a lot of urine. They need to take a lot of dietary fiber also, as sufficient fluid intake is necessary for the fiber supplementation to be effective. You should encourage them to do regular exercise. And many patients have they have a kind of a postprandial bowel movement. Immediately after having their lunch or the breakfast, they feel like passing motion. So there is nothing wrong in that. You can preferably capitalize on that postprandial bowel movement. And most important is, it is better to fix a regular time for bowel evacuation, either in the morning or in the afternoon. There are few people who get benefited with the external stimulation around the anus, whether it stimulates their passage of motion. Obesity and weight reduction. loss of 5 to 10% of body weight, which is sustained for a 12-month period, can reduce incontinence episodes and the need for surgery itself by around 70%. More important is it makes the patient fit for anesthesia. So definitely my first line of treatment would be obesity and weight reduction, and the second line would be a pelvic floor muscle training. Smoking, the number of women who smoke are less, but still it's better to see that they don't smoke or reduce, and it's a good medical practice. The reversible factors like diabetes, hypertension, cardiac failure, chronic renal failure, COPD, all needs to be optimized. So if you control the sugar levels, because of the control in the osmotic diuresis, the frequency and urgency and leak reduces. The first and foremost treatment is pelvic floor muscle training. You need to teach them to do this properly. So what we do is we in India, we have more number of gynecologists than we have physiotherapists. So as you examine the patient, you perform Kegel. So put your finger inside and teach the patient to contract the right muscle. We normally don't do any of these electrical stimulations or biofeedback, etc. This straight pelvic floor muscle training is very useful. And also, this is one reminder technique which I have been following for the past 20 years. Integrating pelvic floor muscle training along with their daily work schedule. This is, for example, if you ask our group of doctors why we don't exercise, most of us will tell there is no time or I forgot. So we teach our patients, this I have been practicing in Government Kasturiba Gandhi Hospital also. We ask our patients to put big sticker bindis on their refrigerator door, on their gas stove, on their TV remote, or on the mobile. So the moment she sees that, every morning she opens the fridge and takes the milk and boils. So at that time, we ask her to do exercise, contract the muscle to a count of 5, and then relax. So asking them to contract midway while passing urine is difficult. So we can even ask them to imitate the act of trying to control the passage of gas. So this, after doing a contraction, we ask them to take rest for about 2 minutes, because continuous contraction may cause muscle fatigue. So we encourage them to do this contraction throughout the day, totally, even up to 50 times. Like they boil milk, then later they come and cut vegetables or watch the TV. So throughout the day, we have reminders which tells them to do the pelvic floor muscle training. Bladder training is another very important aspect. Again, another common proverb is so our people are sort of taught by everybody to empty their bladder as frequently as possible. That is one. Second is, for the fear of leakage, they go and empty very fast and then land up with this frequency problem. So here we ask them to gradually increase the void interval. Here the bladder diary will tell us how frequently they are passing urine. Supposing they are emptying every 45 minutes, we teach them in the next week, when they have the desire to pass urine, they have to sit, do the pelvic floor muscle contraction and wait. So as they do this contraction, the urgent desire will go away and they will be able to continue for some time. So it comes like a crescendo, decrescendo, and we tell them not to rush to the toilet when they have the urgency, to sit and do pelvic floor. Initially, it may look difficult, but with proper training, we are able to make people who pass urine more frequently to reduce the number of time. This training strengthens the pelvic floor muscles and improves bladder stability, is a very useful first line treatment. And supposing I talk only of these exercises, our people will not have the full confidence. So you can add anticholinergics, especially in this mixed incontinence, and we see lower relapse rates. So what are you going to do when you have a stress incontinence? So the easy thing which I tell my postgraduates is S for S. Stress incontinence is surgery. But initially, I was talking about all the other conservative measures. They are useful for both stress and urgency. If finally they don't become all right, the best management of a stress will be surgery. But still, everybody wants to know what you can do by giving medicine. So duloxetine is a selective serotonin and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, giving 40 milligram twice daily. It is not the first line of drug. You can try it for patients who are unwilling for surgery. So, and what are the other things we can have? We have this intramural bulking agents. Like, for example, the urethra is so gaping. After the injection of this periurethral injection, you see it is co-opting. It has an effect by an obstructive mechanism. We give it retrograde injection cystoscopically. But what we need to tell them is repeat injections may be needed, short-term success. The technique is less effective than sling and is costly. So if I tell all these things, we all will almost disown intramural bulking agents. But it is now coming up. With the advent, with these, we see a lot of mesh complications all over the world. So much so, there is a pause on the amount of sling surgeries which are done. Initially, the FDA banned the use of mesh for pelvic organ prolapse. Now they have put a pause on the management of sling also. So the world has now started, okay, what next to do? What minimally invasive procedure we can do? So we are seeing an uprise in the number of intramural bulking agents. We have a drug called an implant, what we can put with the one thing called Bulkamid. How it does is it has an improved seal effect. What we use is glutaraldehyde cross-linked collagen, silicon, carbon-coated zirconipedes. So by injection, we can co-opt the mucosa and then achieve continence. This is how it is done. Okay, all of us are surgeons. We have tried all measures. Now, what are the usual ways which are done? So the maximum thing which is done is a mid-urethral sling or a autologous rectus facial sling. So this mid-urethral sling can be retropubic or transobturator, where we have an inside out or an outside in out approach. Or you can use this is a macroporous polypropylene mesh. We don't cut the hernia mesh. We get these type 1 meshes, macroporous polypropylene, and we use. The other thing is autologous rectus facial sling. Believe me, that is a wonderful surgery. This pubovaginal sling can be done for both urethral for any type of urinary incontinence due to either urethral hypermobility or an intrinsic sphincter deficiency. You can do a pubovaginal sling. It is very, very effective. You have other surgeries like an open burst, where you tighten it with the Cooper's ligament, or we have other minimally invasive like TVT, which is a retropubic or a transobturator. Our indigenous low-cost sling, which because the other ones are very costly, ranging from 28 to 40,000, and we now have some difficulty in getting them also. We are not getting it like we were getting it earlier. So we are using these Indian meshes, transobturator. Artificial urinary sphincters are all not used at all. So it's like a last resort. So how will you make a decision making based on the patient's expectation, age, and overall health, and the relative contribution of hypermobility versus IST? If it is an intrinsic sphincter deficiency, a pubovaginal sling or a retropubic sling. For urethral hypermobility, the simple transobturator slings will be enough. Cost, I told you, retropubic TVT can go up to 40,000. And I will talk to you about the associated pathology. But to make it very, very simple, if you are going to do a procedure from below, like pelvic organ prolapse, fibroid, or DUB, or a trial vaginal, you can go for a mid-urethral sling. If it's intrinsic sphincter deficiency, you have to go through the retropubic mid-urethral sling. You are going to open the abdomen for fibroid or a benign ovarian cyst or an incisional hernia or any other problem which requires concomitant laparotomy. You can harvest a sheath, rectus sheath or 8 by 2 centimeter sheath and use it. It's extremely useful. And the maximum uses in the case of an intrinsic sphincter deficiency. If depending on your skill with the laparoscopic BUSH. The NICE guidelines don't encourage lab BUSH, but if you're extremely good at laparoscopic procedures, you can go ahead with a lab BUSH also. What do the Urological Society of India guidelines tell us? It permits use of customized mesh. Bulking agents are weakly effective in stress incontinence and should be considered only when surgery is inappropriate or refused. Laser therapies are not recommended for treatment of stress urinary incontinence outside research protocols. Then, do you need hysterectomy? No need. Hysterectomy should be done only for any gynec pathology or a pelvic organ prolapse. And simple things to remember, I told you S for S. If it is stress, we operate. What do we do in a mixed? A patient has got both stress and urge. What is predominant, you will do. If stress is more than urge, surgery. And if urge is more than stress, you do medical line of management. In addition, weight reduction, pelvic floor muscle treatment, and pharmacotherapy for the urge component is useful in mixed incontinence. And while you operate on a patient with mixed incontinence, we need to tell them that these patients, the stress will become all right, but the urgency can have an unpredictable resolution or worsen, or it may require medication. Overflow incontinence is another thing which you have to see. So an example is like a procedentia with obstruction, retention of urine and overflow, or a distal urethral stenosis causing obstruction, overflow, or a neurogenic bladder. We have to treat the obstruction, and if it's a neurogenic bladder, we have to do either a CIC or an inwelding catheter. The next part is an urgency, urge incontinence. How do they come? They come with frequency, urgency, nocturia. So they have the moment they think they need to pass urine, they'll have to empty. So they have a reduced time from the sensation of urgency to their actual voiding. So they will have reduced volume per void. So this is the woman I was talking in the initially, an elderly, obese, osteoarthritic, diabetic, hypertensive women who rushes to the toilet because of the fear of leaking and getting scolded by her daughter-in-law or the daughter or the grandchildren, and sustains fractures, fracture neck of femur, etc. and life gets very bad. So we have to teach them that leaking on the floor is not big issue. You can get it controlled or you can wipe it. Don't rush to the toilet and sustain fractures. So in the medical management, to make it short, anybody with the overactive bladder, frequency, urgency, etc., you have to evaluate and treat the causes of increased frequency. Remember here again, many a times we have picked up patients for the first time coming with the sugar of 400. So think of all causes of frequency and then treat. Then level 1, I was talking of all the conservative measures, pelvic floor, muscle treatment, etc. You can try. Then level 2 is the anticholinergics. We have a whole lot of drugs, oxybutynin, tolterodine, solifenacin, dorifenacin, trospium, and a new kid on the block is mirabegron. And the level 3 is the botulinum toxin, sacral neuromodulation, acutaneous tibial nerve stimulation, which is all very high. If they don't become all right with all this, we go into it. So we have a whole lot of drugs. So what we do is we have to counsel them regarding their success and the adverse effects. And you start with the lowest drug. And if the patient is comfortable with that, don't change. And do not use flavoxate, propanthenol or imipramine for the treatment of urgency. Do not offer oxybutynin to frail elderly women. And there is no consistent evidence that one drug is superior to another. So you can choose whatever drug you're comfortable. And the extended release formulations are better. Solifenacin is more effective than tolterodine immediate release. And most of the patients will stop antimuscarinic agents after a few months because of their ineffectiveness, adverse effects, and cost. So all of these drugs are relatively safe in the elderly. What I wanted to tell is, in the Urological Society of India, they did a study and they found what was a common prescribing pattern of the urologists. Most of them were giving solifenacin. So it is better to start with a low dose of solifenacin, 5 milligram, And if they don't improve, you can increase it to 10 mg, or combined with mirabegron, again start with low dose 25 mg and go up with 50 mg of mirabegron. It is better to combine both these drugs rather than markedly increasing the dosage of the individual drug. And this combination is more efficacious and less side effects. Again, this all I told that there is no evidence, so we'll skip. Then if they don't become all right, you can go with botulinum toxin and sacral nerve stimulation, posterior tibial nerve stimulation. This all for completion, refractory urinary incontinence and augmentation cystoplasty, etc. And one more thing, I told you about overflow incontinence in women. What are all the causes? Gynec malignancy, uterine fibroids, ovarian cyst, fecal impaction, urethral obstruction, stricture, prolapse, and urethral distortion. And the other causes, it could be a hypotonic bladder because of diabetes, mechanical interruption of motor innervation like tumors, herniated disc, trauma, etc. These are all little away from our topic. We'll just skip. So our urinary incontinence in females, our goal is to make a patient dry. So freedom from incontinence is what we want. You cure the incontinence in the vast majority of the patient. In case we are not able to, we must try and keep them comfortable, prevent discomfort, prevent complications. So there is no shame in using diapers if they don't become all right. Ultimately, you want patient safety. So what to carry today? A good history taking, methodical evaluation why the leak is there, appropriate management, positive attitude, environmental manipulation, and the best outcomes are achieved.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Such a wonderful presentation with enlightening points, ma'am.
Thank you, Ma.
Ma'am, we have a question from Mr. Sesha, but we'll have the question and answer session after the case scenario discussion, ma'am.
Okay.
Is that okay, ma'am?
Okay, perfect.
Okay,
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. You
Thank
have
you, ma'am.
taught the doctors also to maintain a bladder diary, put stickers over the fridge, gas cylinders, and TV as a
Yes, sir.
reminder to do pelvic floor exercises.
Yes, really, I have found it
Doctors are
useful.
worst patients.
I know, I
Don't
agree.
adapt it.
I know.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Welcome, Dr. Praveen, sir.
Madam, very good evening. Srikala, madam, that was an excellent presentation. You had covered everything so extensively, right from medical management to surgical management. I don't think I have anything more to add. But what I thought is, rather than repeating the same, what I'll do is we'll discuss case scenarios, the patients that we see every day very commonly. So for each scenario, we'll see what has to be done, what should not be done, or what probably we shouldn't miss and do the wrong treatment. So we'll discuss the case scenarios, and as we go ahead, you please give us your expert opinion as to how you would manage those patients. So we'll be discussing about the nuances in the management of female urinary incontinence. I'll be discussing 10 case scenarios. So the format of discussion today would be, we'll discuss each scenario and we'll ask Madam her opinion, and we'll discuss a little about each scenario and relevant take-home points for each. So it will be like the reverse of what Madam did. Madam has discussed all the theoretical and the surgical aspects. Now we'll discuss the case scenario, then followed by what has to be done for each patient. So the first case, a 55-year-old lady, para 2 living 2, normal vaginal deliveries. She complains of urinary incontinence. She is not a very educated lady. She just says she is leaking urine. Her basic examination is all right. She is not obese. Her examination of the abdomen, the PV examination is normal. Are we good to start treatment with this sort of history and examination is what we want to know. Is that okay, madam? Madam's mic is muted. If someone
See, telling just the only complaint is a urinary incontinence on and off. And clinically, you said normal. Now, I would, from the patient, ask her what was the type of incontinence very clearly. Did it come with stress? Was it with urgency? Or was there nothing with her? No complaints at all. Then, is it white discharge? Is it the discharge? Is it smelling of urine? Is it urine leak at all? Because in the clinical examination, you have said that it is normal. There is no leak at all. So complete history I want. What was the nature? Focused history, clinical examination, and a detailed pelvic examination. I agree with you.
Madam
And
rightly said. So we have to elicit a proper history, whether it's urgency leak or whether it's a stress leak or whether she is leaking continuously is what we want to know. And the clinical examination should include a detailed pelvic examination along with basic neurological examination. It not be in detail. So basic neuro examination also. And there are a few specific tests that are done to assess stress incontinence, which is the stress test. Nothing. We just put the patient dorsal lithotomy with a full bladder, separate the labia and ask her to cough. If she leaks, she probably has stress incontinence. Bonnie's test is one test that is used to diagnose intrinsic sphincter deficiency. So we elevate the intrinsic sphincter through the vagina. We put 2 fingers. We ask her to cough. If that is going to correct her stress, then we know that Bonnie's test is positive, which means she has ISD. Next is the Q-tip test. Q-tip test is
one thing we'll add, Praveen.
Yeah, madam.
Only thing is what I want to say, when they're examining for a stress incontinence in a patient with prolapse, you have to reduce the prolapse and then look for stress incontinence.
Rightly said, madam.
Otherwise, the whatever procedentia or the cystocele coming will cause kinking of the urethra and
Very
the
true.
leak will not be manifest. This is what is called examination for an occult incontinence. So this also,
madam.
I think I would add.
Point well taken, madam. Madam, this Q-tip test is the next test that is described in textbook, but I don't think anybody does.
We have all given up now.
Yeah, I think so. So next is the pad test. Pad test can be used to measure the amount of leak, how many grams of urine, or measuring the pad and assessing the severity of the leak. So these are the specific tests that we do in cases of incontinence. So so this is the pad test. When it is more than 50 grams of weight after she coughs, if the weight increases more than 50 grams, it means it is very severe. 10 to 50 is severe. 2 to 10 is light. Less than 2 is she is dry. So next case scenario, madam. So this lady is a 65-year-old lady. She is come with increased frequency and urgency for 10 days duration. And she also complains of dysuria. And she gives a history of having occasional stress incontinence, which is grade 1 incontinence. On examination again, her per abdomen, per vaginal examination is all normal and her stress test is positive. So now are we good to go ahead with the treatment for stress incontinence, or what do we do in this patient?
Definitely her presenting complaint, her what do you call the bothersome factor is not stress, because that you have put it at the end as occasional stress. She is bothered about the frequency and the urgency. So I would definitely, again, bladder diary will help me to find out what is the reason, and clinical examination plus my mind will go for diabetes.
Yeah, madam.
So things evaluating properly.
So this is grossly inadequate. We'll have to evaluate her a little more in detail. A lot of other investigations have to be done. Even though the clinical exam is complete, I don't think she is ready to be started on treatment. What we should do here is we should get an ultrasound, like you said earlier, madam, and we should do a urine routine, urine culture. The ultrasound in this patient showed a thickened bladder, which was suggestive of cystitis, and the urine routine showed multiple pus cells with bacteria, and the urine culture was positive, E. coli 10 to the power of 5. So what we did for her is we treated the UTI and reassessed the urinary incontinence. Like you said, the incontinence was not the main issue for her. Probably she was having a UTI, which made her come to the hospital. She also had incontinence, which was not bothering her. She was occasionally leaking, but she was not bothered much. So every patient that we see, we should get a baseline ultrasound, we should get a urine routine culture, and we should, I always ask for a urea creat during the baseline visit. So these are the investigations that we do: urine routine, urine culture, urine cytology in select cases. Like you said, when a patient comes with hematuria, or when an elderly lady comes with recurrent dysuria which is not getting settling or not settling with antibiotics, then we get a urine cytology and we plan for a cystoscopy in those cases. Uroflowmetry in select patients, but PVR always along with an ultrasound. MRI, CT, and urodynamic study in select cases only. Urodynamics I'll be discussing in the next case scenario. So
No,
the
here-
take-home message, yeah, madam.
One thing, Praveen, the complaint was frequency urgency. So blood sugar and blood sugar, we must not forget. So
Yes,
I
definitely,
think
definitely.
that was one thing I would definitely do.
I should have added that blood sugar should be always checked. Elderly lady with lower urinary tract symptom. Going on to the next case, madam. 23-year-old lady, she is an IT professional. She is complaining of increased frequency of urination every 30 minutes. Nocturia is 5 times. She complains of urgency and occasional urge incontinence. So examination is normal, the urine routine is normal, ultrasound is normal. So you had discussed this earlier. This is classically a patient who is taking too much water, nothing else. So in this patient, we'll be able to come to a diagnosis only with a bladder diary. When you ask her, she says she drinks water normally, but when we probed in, we got a bladder diary, we came to know that she was taking almost 5 to 6 liters of water every day. She was overhydrating herself, thinking that it is going to detox her, get her out of all the urinary problems. Every time she voids, she takes almost 300, 400 ml of water, and she goes to the bathroom once again every 30 minutes. So that is what has been happening. For this patient, the bladder diary is probably the most important tool to assess her. And the take-home message is always get a bladder diary. Our patients find it very difficult to fill it for what reason, we don't know, but we must encourage them. We should teach them how to do it. This is a bladder diary. Ideally, we need it for 3 days, but at least for 24 hours, they should fill it and give it to us. All the fluids that they take, the number of times they void, the amount they void, the amount they take, and if they leak, they should mark it there. And the degree of urgency also has to be marked in this bladder diary. So the next case scenario, madam. 40-year-old lady who has been complaining of increased frequency of urination every 30 minutes. She has nocturia 3 times. She has urgency. She takes water normally and she complains of urge incontinence. Examination is normal. Urine routine is normal. Ultrasound is normal. So this is pretty obvious. She probably is a case of overactive bladder with urge incontinence. So these are the cases which we should not counsel them for surgeries, because surgery is not going to help. We should get a proper history. We should get a bladder diary. And there are so many things in the history which will give us details as to why this is only an urge incontinence. Patients with stress tell us when they strain, they cough, they move about, they leak. But patients with urge incontinence, they'll have a sudden urge to void, they leak. And they usually have an increased frequency also. Stress patients do not complain of increased frequency. So she voids 100 ml each time and she is not able to hold more. When we saw her bladder diary, we came to know this. So she is a case of urge urinary incontinence, but she does not have any stress incontinence. So what we tell her is, first is all conservative. Conservative means lifestyle modifications. We ask her to avoid caffeine, alcohol, spicy food, whichever irritates the bladder. We ask them to avoid that. Next, we go on to the medical management with anticholinergics. Anticholinergics commonly used ones are oxybutynin, tolterodine, and darifenacin. And mirabegron is quite a safe drug, and it is quite commonly used these days. So this is a chart which shows how I manage the urge urinary incontinence patients. I usually start them with tolterodine. Why? Because it's cheap and it's very effective. The only thing is the patients will have systemic side effects. They'll complain of dryness of mouth and constipation. If that is significant, then we should switch over to some other drug. But otherwise, tolterodine is quite safe, 2 to 4 milligrams twice daily. Next is oxybutynin. Oxybutynin, I reserve it only for pediatric population. I generally don't give it for adults. It is safe, cheap, and it is available as a syrup formulation also. Mirabegron is the most recent drug in the market. It is little expensive, but it is very effective. I usually keep it as a second line drug or an adjunct drug, as to like what madam said. Along with solifenacin, mirabegron can be given. As a first line therapy, I generally don't start mirabegron. Only issue with mirabegron is use it with caution in hypertensive patients who are uncontrolled hypertensive. We do not use it. Otherwise, it's a very safe drug. And last is darifenacin. Darifenacin can be used safely in elderly and people with neurological issues. The dose is 7.5. It can be escalated to 15 mg BD also. Madam, anything you have to add to this medical management?
No,
So
I just thought of narrating one of very interesting clinical scenario. If Praveen will permit me, I will.
Please.
So I had a 45-year-old lady who complained of marked frequency urgency dysuria was her complaint, with almost incontinence. It was there throughout the day and night. When we asked her the history which she gave was, she was labeling herself as a recurrent UTI, and she had gone to a doctor who gave her norfloxacin citralca. And so once she saw them, and then she took it 4 or 5 times whenever she used to get that episode. And again, once again, she went after some time. Then again, that another doctor also gave the same medication. So she took that again. And she continued and continued and continued the same for a very long time, when frequency urgency almost reached to the point frequency amounting to incontinence. Her frequency was even like 50 times, 60 times, and literally she was passing urine every 10 minutes, 15 minutes and all. So what was the actual finding with the bladder diary showed that had the voided volume was in like 15, 20 and all. And somebody had started her on an anticholinergic also. There was no response. The message I wanted to tell is, this was a patient who had, finally when she came to us, it was a thimble bladder because of tuberculosis cystitis, and the entire kidney had gone. We had literally, the kidney was a gone kidney. We had to do even an augmentation cystoplasty. So the moral of the story, what I wanted to reinforce is, all frequency urgency dysuria is not equal to urinary tract infection. They may even have normally in tuberculosis, we say sterile pyuria, but sometimes you can grow an organism. But if you think you're treating a frequency urgency dysuria is not becoming all right, please have red flags. Please think whether you're missing a tuberculosis. So we have now a lot of tests like the not only the urine AFB smear cultures, we have the other gene expert, etc. So if a patient has frequency urgency dysuria, apart from the normal urinary tract infection, also think of the possibility of tuberculosis cystitis and even a carcinoma in situ of the bladder. So these are the two. Of course, it's not very common. Carcinoma in situ is not very common, but it's a highly virulent disease. But tuberculosis cystitis, we see doctors also coming late in the course of the disease. It is very common. So let us not miss frequency urgency. It is not just, not like a medical shop fellow who gives anticholinergics when a patient says frequency urgency. So we have to, that's one point I thought would be a nice point.
Yes, madam. Patients come with renal failure, thimble bladder.
Yes.
We would be like in a very difficult situation to offer them help. A baseline ultrasound, a urea creat probably would give us a clue in the early stages. That is why whenever a patient comes, we try to get it at least once during their initial visit, so that we don't miss anything. Even a bladder stone could have been missed, a bladder stone presenting with urgency, frequency, or dysuria.
Fortunately, now the ultrasounds, they pick up stones. Now we have ultrasounds in all centers. So stones, I think they are not missed. They come. Of course, some people come with, we have had some long drawn VVF coming with the bladder stone of the size of potato and all, but that's all little rare.
Rare, yeah.
Okay, Praveen, thank you.
Madam, next case, madam. So 29-year-old lady, she's para 3 living 3, all normal vaginal deliveries, last childbirth 3 months back. She complains of stress incontinence, grade 2. She is obese, BMI is 35, stress test positive. Her ultrasound and all the other basic tests are normal. How do we go ahead for her, madam?
See, I would definitely, she's quite young, but she's completed her family. Anybody who has not completed her family but still has leak, I don't rush and do a incontinence surgery. I want them to complete their family. But this girl, though young, she's obese, 35. So we have to do a weight reduction protocol and pelvic floor muscle. But if
Very
it is really not responding, then I will think of surgery.
rightly said, madam. So first we advise weight loss for her behavioral therapy, Kegels exercise, pelvic floor muscle training, and we start her on a small dose of duloxetine if that is going to help. Duloxetine, madam gives 40, I give 30 mg BD. So weight loss and behavioral therapy generally help, especially in postpartum stress urinary incontinence. We do not have to operate. Young patients, we can always give a trial of medical management and behavioral therapy. They do well. And they must know how to do the Kegels exercises. We should have one trained staff in our OP who will be able to teach the patients properly. Because how much ever we tell them, they will not understand how to do a proper Kegel. So we should have a physiotherapist or a staff who is trained. We should teach them which muscle to contract. And it, like madam said, we can have markers all over the place, which will remind them to do it regularly. Because most often the initial week, the initial couple of weeks, patients do it properly, but then they'll give it up. So that should not be there. So we'll go to the next case scenario. A 40-year-old female, para 1 living 1, normal vaginal delivery. She complains of stress urinary incontinence, grade 2, and she has failed conservative management. Her examinations are normal, Q-tip test plus, and stress test is positive. Her investigations are normal. So this is probably the lady who we are going to counsel for surgery. She has failed medical management. She has completed her family, and she has come to us with a great, moderate stress incontinence. So what do you offer them, madam, as the surgical option?
So I normally, if it is a simple prolapse, urethral simple stress incontinence, urethral hypermobility, I'm very comfortable with the mid-urethral sling, either an inside out or an outside in transobturator. Very easy. The learning curve is also easy. You're able to teach your postgraduates also. So for the simple and straightforward case, and as you've written, I can combine it along with any vaginal hysterectomy repair or anything. But
Yeah,
in
madam.
case I'm opening up, as I put that slide for if I'm opening her up for something else, or if I think the leak is marked, then nothing like a pubovaginal sling, which is very wonderful.
Okay, madam. So transoperator tape probably most commonly performed,
Yes.
quick and easy, early recovery, and it can be combined with pelvic organ prolapse repair or a hysterectomy. But we should not be doing that for an urge incontinence or a mixed incontinence. And neurologic patients, they should also be evaluated in detail before going ahead with the tape procedure. I have a small video. Is it all right if I play, madam, the tape,
Sure.
so that others might mean. The video is visible, madam?
No.
No.
Okay, madam, I'll replay it again. Is it visible now for everyone? No. I think there is some issue. We'll skip that, madam. I don't know, because I could not embed the video into this, so I thought I'll play it separately. I'll continue with the presentation, madam. So next case scenario, a 40-year-old lady, para 2 living 2, both LSES. She complains of stress incontinence grade 2, and she has undergone TOT surgery 3 months back. And she says she has no improvement in symptoms. So this is one case which is going to be...
Slides are not seen.
Okay. I'll share it again. Is it visible now, madam?
Yes.
Yeah. So the next case scenario, 40-year-old lady, para 2 living 2, post LSES. She complains of stress incontinence and she has been operated. TOT done 3 months back. She says she has no improvement in symptoms. So what do we do now, madam?
See, I told you that I would do urodynamics for a failure of surgery. That will be my first thing. Even the other regular incontinence, I don't much do urodynamics. But here,
Okay.
I will want to do first know whether it is an intrinsic sphincter deficiency
Yes,
or it's
yes.
a neurogenic. These are my two things which will be in my mind. And if you are able to do ultrasound and try and see whether the sling, but that and all, I find it
That
very
doesn't help.
difficult.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
madam.
so people like Aparna Hegde are able to see beautifully how this where the sling comes, but otherwise, by and large, it is clinical. If
Okay.
the patient, very simple, trivial stress marked leak equal to an intrinsic sphincter deficiency, empty bladder stress leak, empty supine stress test, positive ISD.
Okay.
But better to do a urodynamics and then go
Yeah,
for
madam.
here. These
So-
are the two things: either a retropubic TVT, or that's very damn costly, or a pubovaginal. Nothing like my full support is for a pubovaginal.
Pubovaginal. Okay, madam. So this patient, again, treatment is going to be little difficult for it. It's probably because of ISD or a poor tape placement. And we try to do conservative measures, or means if it doesn't work, then we can repeat a midurethral sling or a pubovaginal.
The
Pubovaginal
only
probably
thing
helps.
is, no, if a patient has had a midurethral sling, I generally prefer to do a pubovaginal sling instead of putting another tape. It's easier.
Okay,
It's
madam.
easier. Maybe you can put a retropubic tape, but putting a pubovaginal is very good. And
Okay.
here in this patient, no, actually this patient was a previous cesarean. If you analyze a total number of stress incontinence patients, you see most of them would have been a normal delivery patient. So very rarely you get a patient with a previous cesarean. There, if you analyze them, there would have been some factor like a bronchial asthma, bronchiectasis. There will be other factors which worsen her, and then we take her up.
Okay. So we'll go to the next case, which is this is a 53-year-old lady, para 3, living 3, full-term normal vaginal deliveries. She is a diabetic, very poor control of sugars. She complains of both urge and stress incontinence. Her ultrasound shows a PVR of 200 cc. Her abdomen bladder is palpable, otherwise nothing significant. Per vaginal examination, she has a pelvic organ prolapse with a cystocele.
Praveen, your audio is poor.
This is one of the take-home points which I want you to understand. Here, diabetic pelvic organ prolapse with the residual urine. Normally, when we take a patient with prolapse with residual urine, what we tell them is, because of this mechanical cause, you are having a residual urine, and once I do a hysterectomy, you are going to be all right. So unless you correct them, you will not be able. You have to talk to them previously. So when I see a patient with the pelvic organ prolapse, diabetic, and a significant post-void residue, there are two things which we need to do. Do you have the facility to do a urodynamic evaluation, or the patient is cost conscious and doesn't want a urodynamic evaluation? If the patient is cost conscious, then I will clearly tell, I will correct the mechanical problem, the pelvic organ prolapse. I will do a hysterectomy and I will support the bladder. I will do a cystocele repair. That will be my job function. I will have nothing to do with the urinary leak. With the effective bladder contracting and emptying the urine, I will have no role. So that I will clearly talk to them. Otherwise, they will take our life out after having undergone the surgery, and still they have a significant post-void residue. They will be a parasite and take our life on.
Yes.
So that is one. Second is, if they have the facility to do a urodynamic evaluation, I will look. This case is ideal case for a urodynamic evaluation. So you will have to look for whether there is an underactive detrusor, whether the bladder is able to generate powers, whether is it able to contract. That I will analyze. If there is an underactive detrusor, I will clearly tell them that you may require a CIC or a continuous bladder drainage.
Rightly said, madam. So this patient probably has diabetic cystopathy. She's having a neurogenic component. Along with that, she's having some amount of stress also. So she is not going to benefit with hysterectomy or cystocele repair alone. She will require.
I may do hysterectomy, Praveen. I may do hysterectomy and cystocele.
What I meant is leak might not settle, is what I said, madam.
True.
Sorry,
I agree. I agree with what you say.
Yeah. So this lady would need a urodynamic study to document her bladder function, her detrusor function. So where we do a urodynamic study in a patient coming with stress to us is only when we have our diagnosis in doubt, or when the patient has a mixed urinary incontinence or a very severe urinary incontinence. For mild to moderate incontinence in a postmenopausal lady, post normal vaginal delivery, we generally do not advocate a urodynamic study. So these are the specific indications, or when the patient comes with a previous failed surgery, we do a UDS before we go ahead with the second surgery or whatever management. So UDS can be of great help when diagnosis is in question. So like we discussed, UDS gives us an idea about the assessment of detrusor activity, the bladder compliance, and it will help us confirm the incontinence and the cause, and it will also give us an idea about the degree of sphincter weakness and the pelvic floor function, along with urethral function if we are doing a urethral pressure profilometry. So we'll go to the 9th case. She is a 45-year-old lady, evaluated, planned for TOT. Intraoperatively, the anesthetist tells us she is having hypotension in the middle of the procedure. It was an inside-out tape. Things were going all right, but patient is developing hypotension. So what are we worried about, madam?
I'm definitely worried about a vessel injury. So I want to know, is there any hemorrhage? Is she going in for bleeding? Normally, if you follow the mathematics, if you follow the landmarks, and then you you don't generally injure the vessel. But if you go out of the arithmetic, out of the guideline, out of the mathematics, then you may involve.
Yeah, ma'am. So this is one of the devastating complications, but usually it does not require surgery. Settle conservatively. They form a retroperitoneal hematoma, but otherwise they usually settle with conservative management. But like madam said, unless we miss the landmarks, the chance of vessel injury is quite rare. So the intra-op complications of a TOT, which is a safe procedure, still can be bleeding, which can be avoided with good operative technique and a prompt recognition, and it is usually managed conservatively. The other injuries that are common during a TOT are injury to the urinary tract. It can be to the urethra, bladder, or to the ureters very rarely, or vaginal or bowel injuries. So this is an image showing a mid-urethral sling, perforating a bladder. Usually bladder perforations, they heal by themselves. We tend to keep the catheter for a little longer, otherwise nothing much is needed. The last case scenario, madam. So this lady is a 60-year-old lady, post-TOT done 3 years back. Her stress has settled, but she now is complaining of recurrent UTA and dyspareunia.
The red flags which will come immediately into my mind are vaginal extrusion.
Yes,
I will think of vaginal extrusion, and I will also look into erosion into the bladder. These are the two things which will be in my mind.
Yes, madam. So these are the late post-op complications of a patient undergoing a tape procedure. It can be extrusion of mesh, or it can be urethral and vesical erosion. They can present to us with UTA and dyspareunia. Recurrent UTA dyspareunia, we should always evaluate them for this mesh erosion. And occasionally they can come with recurrent incontinence, which can be urge or they develop a de novo urge, or they could develop a neurogenic component later. So these are the post-op complications which occur late. So these are a few images that show mesh erosion into the urethra. And
so I'll just add one point, Praveen.
Madam.
So to prevent this mesh erosion or to have an early diagnosis, I always put in a scope when I put the needle. I put the needle and just just going to take 2 minutes for us to see whether the needle is inside. If there is an entry, inadvertent bladder entry, definitely you will see blood stain fluid. You may see the needle, and immediately if you retrieve it, you can go ahead. You can even go ahead and put the sling in the right way again, and you will be able to escape. But once you have missed and this mesh is inside, retrieving that will be hell of a trouble.
Very true, ma'am. So this is mesh eroding into the urethra, and this is mesh eroding into the bladder, and
It's stone
it
formation.
has formed a stone over the mesh. Yeah, ma'am. So this is mesh eroding into the vaginal wall, which required excision of the mesh. I think that is all, madam. I just wanted to discuss a little, means the same thing with case scenarios. I think you covered most of it, but I think it was good discussing everything with you.
It was wonderful,
so much,
Praveen.
madam.
I enjoyed
Thank you.
yours.
Thank you, madam. Thank you, madam. Thank you, EOGS, for this opportunity. Thank you, madam. It is an honor to be sharing the stage with you.
Thank you.
Dr. Praveen, sir, and thank you, Dr. Sritala, ma'am.
Thank you,
It's
ma'am.
a
Thank you.
wonderful presentation with enlightening points, and definitely we all have take-home messages. And tomorrow in our OPs, if an incontinence patient come, we will definitely treat it right, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Now that he has put a slide on this World Continence Week, I am organizing a Urogynec webinar in association with the Asia Oceania Federation of Obstetrics and Gynec, that we are doing it on June 20th. We'll have faculty from Philippines and our Dr. Ajay Rane and Saida Akhtar from Bangladesh, Professor Rajamaheshwari. So I will send you the link at that day. So please mark your calendar. June 20th morning, 10 to 12:30 Indian time.
Sure, ma'am.
Sure, ma'am. We will
Sure, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
And now we have a few questions from our members, ma'am. From Dr. Sej Stone, how common it is in young women?
In young women, it is not very common. I see this stress incontinence in middle-aged and beyond, and those who have had normal deliveries. These are the women who have it more common. In young women, I don't see it very common. And antibiotics, now the current policy is we don't give antibiotics for asymptomatic bacteriuria. But here, these patients come with symptoms. So we can give. And if we are cost cutting, nitrofurantoin seems to be a better drug now. It's sensitive to most of the infections. So I do give a course of nitrofurantoin when cost is an issue, when they don't want to do a culture, or even if it is a first episode, I do give them nitrofurantoin.
Thank you, ma'am. What is a common pathogen isolated in stress incontinence? And do antibiotics necessary without culture sensitivity?
See, the common pathogen, I answered that. The common pathogen is E. coli only, even normally or with SUI, unless the patient has had a cystoscopy or a previous surgery. He showed about the mesh erosion and calculi. There you find Pseudomonas, Proteus, and so many other things. Straight and forward, the urethra, the bladder has not been tampered. It is commonly a E. coli only. And we do see more incontinence during pregnancy. How they manifest is when they have the severe hyperemesis. When they vomit, they also have a stress leak. That is a common presentation which all of you would have seen. So please utilize this as an opportunity to teach them pelvic floor muscle training. Apart from the regular muscle training, what we call is teaching them the NAC, K-N-A-C-K, NAC. The regular pelvic floor muscle training will take a long time to, have an effect on them. But you teach them this NAC or bracing up. That is, she knows she's going to vomit. So at that moment, if she controls her pelvic floor muscle, the leak will be reduced. And this is a very good opportunity to train these antenatal women with pelvic floor muscle training. They are benefited immensely.
Thank you, ma'am. And from Dr. Revati, our Vice President, what would be the best line of management for urgency and incontinence during pregnancy?
Generally, urgency frequency is there to a certain extent, in the early part, when there is congestion, pelvis, it is there, this compressing the bladder, urethra, we normally don't have the need to put them on any anticholinergic drug. So just a little fluid adjustment of the fluid, a little bladder training, they are all right. I have never put them on any anticholinergic in pregnancy. I don't think it is really required. We will be able to make them all right. Here, one more point which I wanted to tell you is asymptomatic bacteriuria in pregnancy must be treated. Because if you don't treat asymptomatic bacteriuria, there is a high incidence of acute pyelonephritis with its attendant effects like prematurity, low birth weight, etc. So like we screen women for sugar and hemoglobin, everything, it's better we even do a urine culture regularly. And it is one of the indications of treating an asymptomatic bacteriuria.
Rightly said, madam. If I can,
Sure. Yes, Praveen.
Madam, UTI in pregnancy, I think it's a whole topic in itself.
By itself.
I think we should, means it should be emphasized, because we see a lot of patients who are undertreated when they come with UTI during pregnancy. The colony count, even though if it's not very significant, still they should be treated, is what I would like to emphasize at this point, because when they come later with pyelonephritis, it becomes a headache. IUGR, all that is quite common when they have these complications. So treating UTI should be given quite some importance during pregnancy.
Ma'am, again, a feedback, nice presentation with excellent coordination between the physician and urologist, nice senior and younger duo. Thank you, sir. And another question, ma'am, how long should we catheterize an atonic bladder following natural delivery? What antibiotic and how long, ma'am?
This is again another point which I would like to emphasize and have a carry home message. Most of the patients with a normal delivery void urine easily, but we need to train our staff nurses, our residents, everybody, whether they are voiding normally after a delivery because of the painful episiotomy wound, etc. And mind you, in some cases, we have taken big pack inside. Patients coming with retention, when you examine, there has been big pack inside, there have been lots of clots inside. So what we teach is the trial of void protocol. That is, we ask every woman who has had a normal delivery or any woman who has had a surgery and a catheter removed, the next urine, how she is voiding, we have to observe her. Like if she says, I'm not able to pass urine, there's no point in asking her to take 1 liter of urine. The bladder is going to be very much distended and cause more damage. So after delivery, the staff nurse or the resident must, or the patient's attenders themselves must be told that she should be able to pass urine in say 2 to 3 hours. And we give roughly an amount of 250 ml in an hour. We don't overload them. So by the end of 2.5 to 3 hours, you see if they are able to pass urine. If they don't pass, then you can give them some time. We can try all the measures which we do, putting a little warm compress over the abdomen, opening the tap, etc. And then you can give some more time. Here is the point what I would emphasize. Please do a vaginal examination to ensure that there is no clots inside. There is no pack inside. And have you given adequate analgesia? Pain relief has been there. Is there no vulval hematoma? So all these things we have to ensure it is not there. Then maybe even you can give little more time. And if still they don't pass urine, we can put this catheter, in-out catheter. Just put a catheter and see, and after the next 2 or 3 hours, she will be able to pass urine. But because this trial of void protocol is not in the mind of many of our staff nurses or the people who are taking care, we see many people who come to us with, like what madam has written, an atonic bladder following natural delivery. They come to us, by the time we catheterize, it is around more than a liter, more than around 1 and 2 liters. One full Eurobag is full. And here, when we put a catheter, these patients have a lot of failure with this trial of void. Their post-void residue is around 2 liters. So you don't expect that patient will be able to pass urine after you remove the catheter in 3 hours. So these kind of patients, it's better you put them on a catheter for some more time, see that you give pain relief, and then evaluate. If the patient comes to me with the 2 liters of residue, I put the patient on even a week. I don't do it earlier, because if I remove the catheter and then leave, again she goes in for retention. So that gives them a lot of pressure. So depending, if their post void is less, say only 500 ml or so, then I may give only a short time and remove the catheter. But if they're coming with retention and atony, then I put them on a catheter for a long time. And then again, when they come for a subsequent visit, I make them come early, so that when I remove the catheter, the patient is there in our center to look for how she is voiding, how much of urine she has passed. Supposing she has passed around 300 ml of urine, then we are happy. She's passed 50 ml, then we are not happy. Then we can do a assessment of the post-void residue. If the post-void residue is significant, she may need to have a catheter. We generally don't encourage the use of cholinergics like betanicol or using alpha blockers. We don't encourage. We put them on a catheter and then try to regain the tone, and then do a trial removal of the catheter after some time. But we have to, we get a lot of patients like this, especially after a normal delivery or even a cesarean, where the patients and the entire family come to us with the question, my obstetrician has damaged my bladder. They don't realize that it's part of the game. It is not a fault on the OG-Shield. So when you see them itself, you have to tell that this is a postnatal voiding dysfunction. This will recover. It will take some time, but it will recover. So we teach them, and you can put some safe antibiotic. She's a breastfeeding mother. I put a cephalosporins, amoxicillins, and they are fine. So only thing is, prevention is very important. Not receiving the patient with an acute urinary retention of 2000 ml. So every delivery you do, ask your sister, ask your patients and attenders to see the amount of urine she voids. You can even ask the patient, have you passed urine the normal way? Are you happy with the quantity? A cursory examination and a cursory question, they may pass little 50 ml and come back again late in the night with retention of urine. And the worst thing is, they will get advice from all the neighbors to drink lot of water. And the patient comes with severe acute painful retention of urine. So every delivery, every time you remove a catheter, say after an abdominal hysterectomy or after a cesarean, we don't see much. But after a vaginal hysterectomy, again, the patient may not void urine. So we have to follow and screen and see whether they are passing urine normally.
Ma'am, accidental bladder injury during an LSCS. How
Very
to
good.
do a rent repair? What is the suture material to be used?
Excellent. First thing, don't feel very bad. Bladder is close to the uterus. It is all the more close, and it is likely to damage it when you have multiple previous cesareans, or it's an obstructed labor, or in placental problems like placenta accreta, pequita, and all those things. There is a high incidence of bladder injury. So the only thing is, preventive measures, you ensure that the catheter is put and you push all that you will do. Once you open the bladder, the catheter will say hello to you, or you will see a blood-stained fluid in the urine, or you will see increased fluid. Now, you can simple bladder injury, you can suture it yourself in 2 layers. The only thing which you need to know, like when you can suture and when you want the urologist to suture.
Yes.
Supposing it is in the dome, high above, it's not a dependent area, and you are sure it is not, the ureteric orifice is not injured. You can even extend it, there is no wrong. You can look into and see whether both the ureteric orifices are nicely expelling urine. So you know that the ureters are safe. you can suture it. We prefer to use a 3-0 or a 2-0 Vicryl in 2 layers. That is the mucosa and the muscle in 1 layer and the muscle and the serosa in 1 layer. Many a times we see the whole thing is so thinned out. So many a times I may not be able to actually differentiate it in 2 layers and suture. So what you do, a continuous running suture and put like a Lambert you put for a cesarean, you put it in 2 layers. And if the bladder is torn, say maybe 3 centimeter or more, please put an SPC also. Putting an SPC is not a shame. It is like an insurance policy which protects the patient from a clot retention and giving up of the sutures.
Okay.
இது ஒழுங்கா drain ஆவட்ட அதுவாவது drain ஆகும். But many a times I have seen my colleagues saying, madam, don't please put SPC. So the decision whether to put an SPC or not is not because my friend or Aujishin asks me not to put. If the incision length is small, it is in the non-dependent region, and most important, I can ensure that there is a proper drainage. So whenever I go, I have my great trust on my staff nurses as well as on my patients. So I tell my staff nurses and my patient that at least 50 ml per hour must come through the catheter. Because we'll be giving at least 3 liters, 100 ml at least will come. But if it comes 50 ml or less, please call me. Don't hesitate. Because I have seen patients where they put only close the bladder and put one small 16 French Foley that went into clot retention and gave way. So putting an SPC is not a shame. Putting a drain also is not a shame because it will drain out the collected urine. Then the second thing is, just if you have inadvertently opened, nothing will happen. But the problem we have is, supposing, it's a previous 2 LSAs, 3 LSAs, and you try to push the bladder down. Nowadays, I see many people, that is the attitude. So that is okay. But if you are going to do a total abdominal hysterectomy in a previous 3 LSES, unless you push the bladder down, you will not be able to do a complete hysterectomy. Here, what I see commonly is, don't use gauze to push. When the bladder is morbidly adherent, use sharp dissection. You nicely catch hold, you can hold the bladder and then sharp dissection you can do. A little fibers of the cervix onto the bladder is okay, rather than little fibers of the bladder on the cervix. So sharp dissection is one. Don't use gauze to push. And when the other point when you should see is when to call a urologist. Supposing somebody has pushed the bladder, what we see is the anterior wall of the bladder has gone down. The posterior wall is stuck onto the lower uterine segment and the cervix. So if you have to suture it, you need all the walls to be correct. So you have to mobilize that bladder from the lower uterine segment and the cervix, which I find many gynecologists, they find it scary, number one. Number two is, it is on the posterior bladder wall. So if they go down, that ureteric orifices also will be there. So they may be worried about damaging that, or it is also a real possibility. So you can suture a bladder injury if it is in the dome, simple, clean cut. You are able to make out all the margins of the bladder. You can suture. But supposing you need to mobilize the bladder, or you think it is close to the ureteric orifice, or you think one ureteric orifice is involved, please call your friendly urologist and then do. And another moral of the story is, if you open the bladder, it is not criminal negligence. Not recognizing, not suturing may get into trouble. So if you open, you please tell your attenders outside, the bladder was densely adherent. We used all precautions, but still it got opened. You must not say, you say just inadvertently entered. Bladder inadvertently entered. You have not gone with a knife to cut the bladder. And then suture, document in the case sheet and tell the attenders also. Not telling them, seeing the bladder injury later as a retrospective diagnosis and all only will get you into trouble.
Thank
Is
you,
it okay?
ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. And do we have to treat occasion urgency in children around 8 to 10 years, or any further investigations needs to be done?
See, occasional urgency or urgent continence, we generally don't have to treat. Maybe a little in the current 8 to 10 years, what problem we are facing is obesity. So talk to them about weight reduction, talk to them about increasing roughage in their diet, constipation, and check for any infection. I think that should be fine. An occasional urgency should not be a problem, but if it doesn't settle, yes, go the right way and then evaluate.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, how to treat bedwetting in a school-going girl?
So in a school-going girl, when we are seeing nocturnal enuresis, we have to know which type it is. One is a primary nocturnal enuresis, meaning that child has been dry. By about say 1.5 to 2 years, she has attained control of the bladder and has become dry. And later, now she has got bedwetting. So this is a secondary nocturnal enuresis. If a child is bedwetting daily from the time she was born till now, that is primary nocturnal enuresis. That, of course, not only we see, we treat them, how to give fluid, and we can give desmopressin and all that. That is a simple thing. Here, the carry home I want to tell is, if you are seeing bedwetting in a school-going girl, especially the secondary nocturnal enuresis, she was dry earlier and now she is getting, beware of a sexual abuse. Maybe she's coming and telling you for this. See, I'm not telling all secondary nocturnal enuresis is equal to sexual abuse. The secondary nocturnal enuresis is something else. There can be sibling rivalry, school, they have some psychological issues or thing. But what we are worried is in adolescent girl, maybe think of the possibility of a sexual abuse also. Parental disharmony, all those things can happen. And again, my friend diabetes, I had a referral from a physician's family for bedwetting in a young girl. It was a physician's family, and you believe me, when I did a blood sugar, her sugar was 400. So no, I just wanted to highlight sexual abuse, but you have to complete, there is some cause. What is the cause? You have to evaluate and then treat.
Thank you so much, ma'am. The question and answer were highlighted well. I guess all our EOGS members are happy. And ma'am, any other further questions to be addressed?
Purnima madam, if I can take
Yes,
1 minute
sir.
of the discussion.
Sure,
Since we
sir.
had a discussion about bladder injury, I'll just show you a couple of photos. Last week I had a patient, a bladder injury. The screen is visible, madam.
Yes, yes, Praveen.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
sir.
Yeah. So this patient underwent transvaginal hysterectomy, and intraoperatively there was a gush of fluid. The surgeon called me. Then I told, just put in a catheter. We'll see whatever happens. She was a morbidly obese lady. Then next morning she was continuing to drain urine, which was mildly high colored. So then I told, we'll do a cystoscopy first. Then we'll decide what has to be done. So I did a cystoscopy. There was a bladder rent. The third pedicle had injured the bladder on both sides. The ureters were safe, but I still placed ureteric stents on both sides. This is the image that is showing the stent inside. I opened the bladder, the catheter is out. This clamp is on the vault. So it was more like a VVF repair only. I had to separate the bladder, repair the bladder. I kept in the catheter, but I didn't put an SPC in this patient. I only placed a 3-way Foley. Like madam said, the first day evening, I get a call saying there is no urine output. The urine is bloody red. I had started irrigation, but the staffs had not continued the irrigation. So SPC is always safer in those patients. We at least have something to bail out of. So that is some take-home message. So this is the image that is showing the open bladder. She was a very obese lady. So it was a little difficult operating on her. She has gone now with a catheter home. I'll probably be removing the catheter in 4 weeks duration. I think she should be all right, but I still have counseled them. Early repairs, usually I counsel them regarding the chance of fistula formation. We never know how they heal. But it's always better to go in early rather than taking them on the 3rd or 4th day. Either take them the same day or the next day, or means leave the fistula to heal and then repair later. When do you prefer to repair the fistulas, madam?
Can I add a few things and then answer your question?
Yeah, ma'am. Yeah, ma'am.
Now, this is a very common scenario wherein during vaginal hysterectomy, there is an inadvertent entry into the bladder or a doubtful entry into the bladder. So at that point of time itself, I put in a Foley push fluid and then see where it is. And I don't know whether you'll agree. We all take passion in suturing it vaginally. For me, going through that abdomen, my God, what a difficult opening and doing. Whereas if you nicely put the patient on lithotomy and good labial sutures, you will be able to see. Now, at which point did they open the bladder is a question. Many times, usually what happens when they cut the pubocervical ligament and push the bladder, that is the point where it opens. So what I do is I push it separate, complete the hysterectomy from below, and then now the bladder is hanging. The only difficulty here is there is an altered anatomy. Since the bladder is coming like this, you really won't know where the ureteric orifice is. So I spend some time in locating the ureteric orifices where it is. If you have stent in your theater, you can put a stent. If you don't have because you may be called at places where there is no stent also. And if you don't have that day stent in your car, you may land up without stent. And then I use an infant feeding tube. I put in an infant feeding tube and anchor it with catgut and then do a sutures of the repairing of the bladder. And after I have repaired the bladder also, I do a sister seal repair and a vaginal wall closure. And here, no, I've not done anything above. I take a calculated risk and put a 22 Foley and see that I give good fluids. This is a patient where I see really teamwork, not only the doctor, the staff nurses, the patient and the attenders. I tell them, Ma, I have done everything, but now that the ball is in your court, please ensure that it is draining well. Then I'm able to do. So most of the suspected injuries on table, we do it that day itself. The moment my colleague calls me saying that there is a little doubt, we try and do it immediately. But otherwise, if it is a clean-cut bladder injury and you are seeing it on day 2, day 3, we can take up. Other than that, if the patient comes with an established fistula, I am a little conservative surgeon. I take it almost at 3 months only. An established fistula. If it is a small fistula, say 3 mm, 4 mm, I do give a trial with a catheter with a 22 French Foley. And if the catheter after a week is able to stop the leak, then I know it's a small fistula which will close on catheter drainage. But if it doesn't, and in addition to the leak, she's going on leaking, then there may be no use of the Foley at all. So I may remove it also. But I little take delayed. I know books now say there is an early period where you can start, because we see a lot of patients with recurrent VVF. I'm a little skeptical.
I think 3 months is ideal, madam. I don't think
3
going
months.
in any time before that, the fibrosis wouldn't have settled. The tissues are very friable. So I think 3 months. Thank you, madam.
Thank you, ma'am.
What do you do with that
At this
infant feeding
junction,
tube?
What do you do with the infant feeding tube, madam?
Yes, you have put two infant feeding tubes.
Yes. Nice question. Very nice question. Now, if I have put why I have put a catheter is, one, I know for sure during this hysterectomy, the ureters are also not damaged. So by putting an infant feeding tube, I know the tract is okay. That is one. Number two reason why I am putting is, as I suture the bladder, inadvertently, I will not suture the ureteric orifice. Sometimes it may be close by. So once I have sutured the bladder, 1 minute, I don't know whether Just 1 second, hold on. Okay. So once I have sutured it and I know it is little far away, I will gently withdraw it also. Or otherwise, if I'm leaving it inside, what I do is I cut the hub and leave it inside. Most of the women pass this infant feeding tube per via naturalis after we remove the catheter. I keep the Foley for easily for 2 weeks. I don't, some books say you can remove it in a little earlier period. I am a very conservative person. I keep it for 2 weeks. If possible, I even keep it for a longer time. And after that, we leave them. Many of them will pass the infant feeding tube via naturalis. I give again another 2 weeks time. If they don't pass that, I put in a scope and take it off in a jiffy.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much,
Thank you,
madam,
ma'am.
for clarifying that.
Ma'am, one more question, ma'am. Drugs for primary and secondary nocturnal enuresis, ma'am.
Desmopressin is a very good drug. It comes in the name as Minirin. It is very, very useful. The thing is basically in enuresis, no, the normal circadian rhythm, you have the antidiuretic hormone. There is a increased antidiuretic hormone at bedtime. But in these people, we don't see that increase in the antidiuretic hormone. So we think that there is an increase. So this acts, and we give desmopressin. Most of the patients improve with the dietary modification and all that. Only thing is, what we have to remember in this nocturnal enuresis is there is primary. They're all, what we call Kumbhakarnan. When you ask them, no, nama alarm veppanga, patient, and one of my talks, I usually put a picture saying the mother, the father, and the younger sibling also will come and try waking this. The alarm will ring, all the three will come and wake, but this child will sleep. So they are deep sleepers. Though as per the study, there is no difference in the REM or NREM, but practically they are deep sleepers. They will very difficult to wake them up. That's why even a lot of alarms are now tried. Though they talk about body alarms, I teach the mobile alarms because we put in the music which they like and keep it near them. And it's better to not to, one thing which I would tell is, I don't see the present day parents. Earlier parents, they used to come and bully the child. So don't bully them. It is not their fault. It's, it's like, we call a maturational lag. So don't blame them. Don't bully them. But you can include them in the cleanup activities. But don't bully them. Instead of punishing them, reward them for dry nights. So the entire family must be patient, must be perseverant, and then treat this nocturnal enuresis.
What is the average time period for this desmopressin and any specific dosage, ma'am?
See, we generally know, usually by and large, especially in the summer, we see a good response. In winter, we see that they take little failures can happen. So it's better to start little time in the summer and slowly improve them. Some people take at least 3 months, 6 months. It is a little individual variation. 0.2 varaikkum kudukrom, they become all right with that. 0.1, 0.2.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your patience in answering all our questions. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
At this juncture, I want to thank Praveen for helping me in a severe bladder injury during the peak Corona time. And the patient was discharged in a very good position. I thank Praveen. Thank you, Praveen. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for sharing your experiences from incontinence to nocturnal enuresis. And we are very much thankful to you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you.
This opportunity was wonderful. Thank you, EOGS team. This was well organized. Madam gave us so much insight about incontinence and so many other issues. It was a very informative and useful discussion that we had today. Very well organized. Hats off to the new team. EOGS will be doing great work. We are expecting a physical meeting soon.
Hopefully.
Sure, sir. The next meeting will be definitely in person.
We don't want this.
But you know, even these meetings are good because we can hear as we are doing our work. So I think meetings are also good. Otherwise, we might have missed the meeting totally. Thank you. Thank you very much. You've done a good job. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Thanks to the entire.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks to the entire E-Road Gynex team for this well-organized team. Would come sometime in person to see you all. Wonderful seeing you all and interacting. I really see a very vibrant, lovely team. Wish you all the best and hope you continue this joyous attitude. Wish you all
Thank
the
you,
best.
ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, ma'am.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Hello, other EOGNs.
Hi, Nancy.
Sunday, we are going to celebrate International Women's Day.
Okay,
At
ma'am.
Railway Hall, E-Road. A proper invitation will be posted in our group. Be
Nancy,
prepared.
next
It
Sunday.
starts
Not this Sunday, next Sunday.
next Sunday, not tomorrow.
Yeah.
7th March.
Okay.
7th March. Thank you.
Thank you, Purnima. We had very nice time.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you so
Praveen,
much.
sir.
Thank you, Purnima.
dear. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, dear
Badger team.
EOGS.
Thank you, Badger team,
Thank you.
for the successful conduct of the first webinar.
Thanks,
Thank you so
ma'am.
much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, dear EOGS team members. Thank you all.